Hello. Today I'm going to talk about my top 10 Western alchemy books. It's raining like mad here in South Korea, and I got quite wet on the way home, and I think it's a good time to talk about alchemy because dissolution and all that stuff. But I should mention that when I say Western alchemy books, these are non-fiction books. I am going to mention one fiction book briefly, but it's not in the list. But if you like anything you see here, you can hit that like button and the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Or you can share this video if you know anyone that likes alchemy or the Hermetic tradition. They might get something out of it. I don't know. We will see. But I'm going to start with a brief description of alchemy. So here we go. Alchemy, rooted in ancient Egyptian and Greek wisdom, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, is a multifaceted tradition blending practical laboratory work with philosophical and spiritual exploration. Central to its philosophy is the quest for spiritual enlightenment through the great work, symbolized by the transmutation of base metals into gold or the creation of the philosopher's stone, representing spiritual perfection and immortality. Alchemists employed symbolism and allegory to convey these concepts, utilizing laboratory experiments to explore the transmutation of matter and consciousness. This tradition, with its emphasis on the interconnectedness of the physical and spiritual realms, has profoundly influenced Western thought, shaping not only the development of chemistry, but also various esoteric and mystical traditions. Okay, so I've been a fan of alchemy for a long time, at least about 20 years, I'd say. And if you know anything about it, you know that it's closely knit into the Hermetic tradition. And the idea is to take lead and turn it into gold. But that is the profane idea, not the sacred idea. One thing that is common about those two opposing viewpoints is that there's a connection between the physical and the spiritual. And if you see the alchemical process as an allegory, then I think all the texts make a lot more sense. The problem is people think it's a purely physical thing, especially when it comes to chemistry. And maybe in the past, that was definitely a part of it. But I think the real gold of the alchemical process is in the spiritual self, not the physical. The physical is more of a reflection of that spiritual, let's say. But I will say this first, that all of the books on this list are a bit difficult to enter because alchemy is a coded language of cipher and symbol. There are key principles that are used in it. The idea of correspondences, as above, so below, the microcosm, the macrocosm. There are these dualities through the whole thing and conundrum often. It's the unity of opposites and the transmutation of matter and consciousness. So with that said, this list is going to only be Western books, not Eastern alchemy. I was thinking about doing an Eastern alchemy list, but I just think it might be too difficult and there's not enough there. I have read some Chinese alchemy, but I don't know. Maybe in the future I'll change my mind. But right now, this is going to be Western. It will touch on aspects of Hermeticism, but I'm going to avoid any kind of Kabbalah, which is also tied into this, just because if I include that, it will be a very long video, and I think that's a subject for a different time. in choosing these books, I wanted to have a balance between accessibility and depth of knowledge. So that was a major factor in my choices. I also wanted to have a balance between ancient and modern. Before we get into the list, though, I want to mention two books real quick. The first one is a fiction book called Frankenstein. If you've not read Frankenstein, I highly recommend that book. One of my favorite books of all time. For a novel, I think it's one of the greatest representations of alchemy of all time, and the dangers of alchemy, and the dangers of hubris. But if you understand alchemy at the correct fundamental level, Frankenstein will be a very different book for you than if you don't. So maybe if you read some of these other books on the list that I have, and later you go into Frankenstein, if you haven't read it before, I think it's a great idea. You should try it. The other book that I'm going to mention is called The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. The only reason I'm not going to discuss it in this video is because I have a whole video of it on here, but I also talk about it in several other videos on my channel. However, there's a great section on alchemy in there. You might get something out of that if you look into that as well. On the screen here, I put a list of alchemists, and I put this here primarily because all of these alchemists have something good to add to the conversation, but much of their work is hard to enter because many of them live at a time where they're being persecuted. So it's very put into cipher and a little bit obtuse. So I think there are things to be gleaned from all of these alchemists, but I didn't put their books on the list because I think they're a little hard to penetrate. If you like some of the ones on this list and you want to go deeper into alchemy, I suggest looking into some of these people. At number 10, we have Alchemists Through the Ages by Arthur Edward Waite from 1888. In Alchemists Through the Ages, readers are taken on a historical journey through the diverse practices and philosophies of alchemy, from ancient civilizations to the European Renaissance. Waite's meticulous exploration reveals the enduring fascination with alchemy, its evolution over centuries, and its profound impact on both science and spirituality. So if you don't know, Waite is the creator of the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, one of the creators. And he was in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, but he also founded the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross, and he is a pillar of the Hermetic tradition, basically. This is a foundational work. It's quite scholarly. He discusses ancient civilizations through the Middle Ages and on into the Renaissance. He goes very deep into the language of alchemy and the allegorical representations. There is a great clarity of writing here. It's very clear despite it being very scholarly. And it's a bit dense and academic at times, and that's probably why I have it so low on the list. And you could even say it's a little out of date. It's interesting how some of the books on this list can transcend hundreds of years and they still seem fresh, and other ones kind of seem like they were written in the time that they were written in. So I think this one feels a little bit written in the time that it was written in. At number 9, we have The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz by Anonymous from 1616. A mystical journey filled with alchemical symbolism and spiritual allegory set within the context of a royal wedding. The narrative follows Christian Rosenkreutz as he embarks on a transformative quest, delving into the mysteries of alchemy and the search for spiritual enlightenment. This is one of the most important texts in Rosicrucianism. If you don't know what Rosicrucianism is, it's the idea of the Rosy Cross, and it's kind of like a mystical Christianity. And in the 1600s, there was this great movement filled with their own kind of allegory, symbolism, and mysticism. But in this story, it tells the mythic tale of Christian Rosenkreutz, who undergoes a series of trials and initiations in a mysterious castle. The allegorical nature of the narrative allows for multiple interpretations, and that's why it's so interesting. As someone that's very fascinated with Rosicrucianism, I think this book is invaluable. And I read it back when this is kind of hard to explain. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I had a moment when I was doing a lot of occult study, and I wouldn't call it like an initiation because I feel like I had already done that several years before that, but it was like kind of like the next step. And I remember getting a tattoo at that time, and this book kind of came to me. At that time, a lot of books were just kind of appearing, and this is the one that kind of led me down the path of the Rosy Cross, which I feel like in some ways I'm still on today. So for me, it holds a special place. I'm not sure if it will fill the same need for every person, but for me, it was very important. At number 8, we have the Hermetic Tradition, Symbols and Teachings of the Royal Art by Julius Evola from 1931. An in-depth exploration of the Hermetic tradition, its symbols and teachings. Evola delves into the esoteric aspects of Hermeticism, unraveling its philosophical depth and spiritual significance, offering readers a comprehensive understanding of the ancient and influential tradition. So I actually read this book around the same time as I read the previous book on this list. And, you know, I was just devouring things on alchemy at that time. Evola is a bit of a controversial man. He's an Italian philosopher. And during World War II, he had a lot of negative experiences. So after that, he kind of rejected modernity and turned his back around to kind of go back into traditionalism. Now, some would say that sounds like a good idea, but then that kind of led him into a lot of far-right groups. But with that said, I think he is an excellent researcher, and this book has a lot of rigorous scholarship and depth in its research. There are many deeper layers of meaning here, hidden behind the alchemical imagery, the mystical diagrams, and the esoteric allegories. One thing that he excels at in this book is the historical and cultural context. I've been kind of fascinated with Julius Evola. In fact, you know, I think if you have any notion that there's an occult war going on in the world, then you've probably come across Evola's writings before. He is a controversial man, but I definitely think that there's a lot to glean from his intellect. At number 7, we have Alchemy, an introduction to the symbolism and the psychology by Mary Louise von Franz. A comprehensive exploration of the psychological dimensions of alchemy, drawing upon Jungian psychology, von Franz decodes the symbolic language of alchemical texts and imagery, revealing their relevance to the process of individuation and psychological transformation. Okay, so von Franz is a Swiss psychologist, and she studied Jungian psychology, but her focus was on folklore. So she's got this kind of accessibility that I think Jung kind of lacks to some degree, although I think he accomplishes it in some of his books. But some of his books can be a bit too dense. She comments a lot on alchemy in the use of psychotherapy here, and it's kind of mirror in individuation. And she does all of this through the Jungian lens. There are a lot of practical insights in here. I think her work is very good. I can't remember the name of the book, but I also read a book of hers on folklore, and it definitely incorporated some things from alchemy in that book as well. I find her pretty fascinating. It's interesting to think about all the people that were kind of inspired by Carl Jung, and there are a lot of them, and she is just one of many, but yeah, I think her work is great. At number 6, we have The Forge and the Crucible, The Origins and Structure of Alchemy by Mircea Eliade from 1956. Eliade's seminal work delves into the historical, cultural, and symbolic dimensions of alchemy, exploring its origins in ancient metallurgy and its development across different cultures and epochs. Through meticulous analysis, Eliade unveils the profound philosophical and spiritual significance of alchemical practices, shedding light on the quest for both material transmutation and spiritual transformation. Okay, so he is a Romanian historian of religion. He's a philosopher, a novelist, and an anthropologist. And his name is incredibly hard to say also, so I want to try to get that right. He's very much into mythology and shamanism, ritual, and comparative religion. And I adore all of his books. I've read all of them. He is very important if you're interested in ritual or shamanism. Highly recommend his works. And this book is no different. It's an anthropological perspective of alchemy, which is interesting and makes this stand out a bit from the other books. It focuses on the rituals of it, the sacred and the profane, which is an idea that he kind of champions. He talks a lot about eternal return and sacred space and the alchemical transformation, and the kind of mystical part of it. And he does that through the lens of history, anthropology, psychology, and comparative religion. I think this is a very, very useful book if you want to understand the mechanisms behind alchemy. I think this is great. At number 5, we have Psychology and Alchemy, Volume 12, in the collected works of Carl Jung from 1953. Jung delves into the intersection of psychology and alchemy, exploring the symbolic language and transformative processes found within alchemical texts and practices. Through a Jungian lens, he interprets alchemical symbolism as expressions of the unconscious and explores how alchemical imagery reflects psychological phenomena such as individuation and the integration of the psyche. Jung's work in Psychology and Alchemy offers profound insights into the human psyche and its relationship to the symbolic language of alchemy. So he focuses mostly on the symbols as expressions of the collective unconscious, and he kind of sees the alchemical transmutation as an analogy to the journey of self-discovery in terms of finding yourself through psychology. There's a lot of theoretical analysis here, as opposed to practical application. I mean, there is some in here, but I think there's a lot more analysis. He's very rigorous in his scholarship, maybe a little bit too much, but I feel like in the modern world, in the world that we live in, you can't really discuss alchemy concisely without understanding it in our modern psychological lens, which Freud and Jung both had a large part in creating. So in my mind, I think he's just kind of passing on the knowledge to the next generation, but some people might think that our understanding of psychology is new, or at least new in the last 100 years or so. But I think people knew this a long time ago, and they are just rediscovering it, maybe. In fact, if you look at a lot of ancient texts, the ideas are already there. Maybe they're worded differently, but the ideas are there. So I would just see him as another in a long line of alchemists, really. Now, people might say, oh, but yeah, he wasn't a physical scientist, let's say. But I don't think that's necessary. I think, like I said earlier in the video, I think the real philosopher's stone is the spiritual. It might influence the material world in certain ways, but the core of it is in the spiritual. At number 4, we have the Emerald Tablet, Alchemy for Personal Transformation by Dennis William Hook from 1999. In this transformative guide, Hook delves into the ancient wisdom of the Emerald Tablet attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, offering insights into its symbolic language and practical applications for personal growth and spiritual development. Drawing from both historical sources and contemporary interpretations, Hook illuminates the profound teachings of the Emerald Tablet, guiding readers on a journey of self-discovery, inner alchemy, and personal transformation. There are some that might think this book doesn't belong on this list, or it should be much lower on this list, but I'm going to state my defense on this. So I read this book when I was just getting into alchemy, and you could say that is the great thing about it, is it's a good introductory. If you don't know anything about this topic, I recommend this book maybe more than any on this list for that. He has written many books on alchemy and hermeticism, but this one is a very good intro to the ideas. It's very accessible. There's a good integration between theory and practice, and it's also done in a way that's easy to understand. There are a lot of guided techniques, which I found invaluable. It has modern relevance, so it's in pretty much the modern world. I mean, it's now more than 30 years old, but it definitely is useful, I think. And it also focuses a bit on the legacy, which I think is very important, because the alchemists often pass down to each generation. And yeah, I think it's a good book if you want to get into it and you don't really know where to start. When I read it, I devoured it. I read it in a couple afternoons, and it took me down so many paths, and actually several of the books on this list I would not have known of if I had not read this one. There are many things mentioned in here that led me to other alchemists, and a lot of historical I don't want to say historical roadmaps that kind of took me off into these other directions. I think this is a great book. At number 3, we have The Philosopher's Stone by Israel Regardie from 1938. Regardie's work explores the elusive concept of the Philosopher's Stone, a central theme in alchemy from both historical and symbolic perspectives. Drawing upon alchemical texts and esoteric traditions, Regardie delves into the quest for spiritual enlightenment and the transmutation of consciousness symbolized by the Philosopher's Stone. Through insightful analysis and practical guidance, Regardie offers readers a deeper understanding of alchemy's profound teachings and their relevance to personal and spiritual transformation. Rigardi is the former secretary to Aleister Crowley, and he also worked with Carl Jung as well. So he definitely has the pedigree. He wrote 2 excellent books, one called The Tree of Life, and the other called The Garden of Pomegranates. I recommend both of those books if you're interested in magic in any way. But this one is a comprehensive overview of the concept of the Philosopher's Stone. That's what it centers on. And he does this through meticulous research, some practical insights. It has a lot of Jungian psychology in it. If you know anything about Rigardi, he's trying to carry on the legacy of the Golden Dawn, the mystical order. And, you know, he was just a really interesting guy. And I think what he does here gives you some unique perspective on what the Philosopher's Stone actually is. And, you know, many people have very different ideas of what that actually is. Some think it's the elixir of immortality. Some people think it's the way to turn lead into gold. Some people think it's actually like some kind of financial mumbo jumbo, the secret of life, the fountain of youth, like all these different things. But a lot like Taoism, I think the alchemical tradition has lots of conundrum. It's not easy to get your head around what the actual purpose is. Even in the case of this book where he's kind of describing things, I think he's taking you there to kind of lead you to this idea that's off to the side, that's not the actual thing. And that's the problem with all of this, is that people want it to be literal, and it's not literal. Not saying that those that figured out the secret of this weren't able to do things that might seem supernatural. Not saying that. But what I'm saying is that the actual symbols and tradition were never meant to be literal. And I think once you see them as allegorical, and once you see how they work in terms of transmuting your consciousness, then I think it's a very different story. At number 2, we have The Kybalion by 3 initiates from 1908. This seminal work presents the principles of Hermetic philosophy through the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, drawing from ancient wisdom and esoteric traditions. The book explores fundamental concepts such as the Hermetic principle of correspondence, the nature of the universe, and the laws governing mentalism, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. Through its concise and profound teachings, it offers readers insights into the universal principles that underlie the fabric of reality and provides guidance for personal transformation and spiritual growth. So the beauty of this is its simple, straightforward language. It has a brevity and a power that I think many other books on this list lack. It has a mystery surrounding it. Nobody really knows who the 3 initiates are, but I think it's a good entry point into understanding Hermetic thought and the universal principles of alchemy. It goes very in depth on the law of mentalism and the principle of correspondence and the principle of polarity and how to use that in your daily life. Much of it is drawn from the work of Hermes Trismegistus, and I'll get to that in a minute, what that actually means. But I think this is a very important book in the kind of lineage of alchemy, and I think anyone that wants to truly understand it should definitely read this. I think it's a great, great work. At number 1, we actually have a tie. We have the Emerald Tablet and the Corpus Hermeticum, both attributed to Hermes Trismegistus between the 1st and the 3rd century AD. The Corpus Hermeticum is a collection of ancient philosophical and spiritual texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. It consists of a series of dialogues and teachings that cover various topics such as cosmology, theology, astrology, alchemy, and spiritual transformation. The Emerald Tablet is a short, cryptic text attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, which is said to contain the essence of Hermetic wisdom. It is believed to have been inscribed on a tablet made of emerald or green stone and contains the famous phrase, "as above, so below." I should say this now, that this Hermes Trismegistus is a mythical figure, not unlike Jesus or Buddha or someone. They aren't even really certain if this was one person. It could have been many people that are writing as one person. But whatever this was, whether it's a person or a group, it changed Western thought completely. It took Egyptian ideas and reworked them and distilled them into kind of sort of Greek presentation, let's say. The tablet is the shorter text. It's almost like the Ten Commandments, maybe, is one thing to compare it to. It's not very long, but it contains the Hermetic principles, kind of the rules of alchemy. And the corpus is a series of texts, could be multiple authors. It's almost more like the Bible. They say that maybe the authors were like his disciples, but these are like the teachings or discourses of Hermes Trismegistus, and they're philosophical, theological, and mystical. I think both of these works have a timeless wisdom and a power that is very clear once you read them. This is super influential to any alchemists, mystics, philosophers, or occultists. All of them have gained so much from these two works. It's true ancient wisdom, and every kind of tributary stems from these two books in Western occult thought. It just all goes from here. And I think they're great. I think if you haven't read them, you should read them immediately. I think they're amazing. But that's about it. I'm going to wrap it up. All I'm going to say is alchemy had a profound impact on my life. I use it daily to understand books I'm reading or philosophical ideas I'm trying to wrap my head around. I'm thinking about it when I'm trying to have different kinds of like magnetism in my life, or sort of thought form ideas. Like all these things all go back to alchemy. I don't think you can truly understand the world unless you understand alchemy. I just don't think it's possible. If you don't agree with any of these, you can mention that in the comments, or if there's some that you especially like, you can also talk about those. If you think I left some off that should be on here, which there probably are because there's thousands of alchemical texts, you can mention those in the comments. I will say this, I have read a lot of them, so I probably read them, I just didn't include it on the list. I haven't read everything, but all the major works I think I've read. Yeah, if you know anyone that's interested in alchemy or that you think might benefit from this video, you can share it with them. And that's about all I got. I will talk to you next time. Take care. As above, so below.